So I've done a little bit of tweaking and I've adjusted the randomized values to bring them a little closer together. I felt that the particles were a little too oblong in the y-axis. The range was just a little too great, and as a result the particles are a lot more uniform now, but they still have variety. And if I draw my render region, and again I'm going to have many more particles than the 100 per frame you see here, but now I'm able to take this a little bit further, and you can start to see the individual flakes in this terrain. So now it's just a matter of rendering the particles, and to do that we're going to separate this into layers and isolate the particles themselves. So I'm going to use passes to do this, and the easiest way of course is to take the environment, the sky dome, the ground, and the birch, and essentially just hide them and render the particles off on their own layer. What we could do is use the environment and birch as a mask for the particles, which might be better to do. So in this case, the sky dome is going to be hidden. I want the black of the environment to act as alpha for the particles, and this is going to prevent that from happening. So I'm going to switch the Explorer mode to Passes mode, and I'm going to partition off this object. So this is the default pass. Actually, let's not alter this pass. Let's go and create a new empty pass, and I'm going to call this the Snow Pass. We'll just save our scene here just to back it up. And within this pass, I'm going to take the sky dome and partition it off into its own partition, new partition. So I'm going to call this the hidden partition, and I'm going to hide the contents of that partition there. I'm going to take the point cloud and the emitter object. I'm going to partition them off. So I'm going to call this snow cloud and emitter. We want these visible. And finally, with the background objects remaining, I'm going to partition those guys off, and that leaves an empty background objects partition, which is okay. I can always populate it again. And I'm going to name this partition the ground mask objects. And to these objects here, we're going to give them a constant black color. So we're just overriding the initial colors on the colors and textures and replacing them with constant black. So if I go into the Materials Manager, with this default library right here, I could rename this material library and call this the Environment Materials. And I could add to that, I'll just create a new material, and I'll rename this material something like Mask Colors, not Max. And I'm going to replace the Fong with a black constant illumination shader. I could also use a color share if I wanted to as well, so I could go color share. And the color share also has alpha, so this might even be a simpler shader to use. So I'll delete the Fong preset and replace it with a color share shader. I'm going to set the color to black, and now if I assign this mask color to the group, to the partition, assign to selection, I could put this into a constant mode, and again everything will look a little bit strange where we see the actual vertex color map from the textures, but now you can actually see what we have here. And if I start to edit the color, you can see how it shows up. If I just look at the alpha channel, I'll click on the pull down arrow and display the alpha. I want the alpha to be solid white, or I can cut it out completely if I want the particles to composite over top, if I wanted to isolate these particles for a blur, so I can actually remove the ground plane from the alpha. So that's kind of useful. So what I'm going to do now is actually just render off this particle layer, and of course I'm going to need to render a layer of the background in the snow as well to composite it all in. So we'll finish this off, by adding a couple more passes. So I'll say create a new empty pass. I'm going to call this the ground tree pass. And to this pass, all we need to do is open it up. So we've got the ground and tree pass. We've got the background objects partition. And from that partition, I'm going to take the birch and the ground and partition them off. So we'll call this the ground partition. We don't want to do anything to that partition. We do want to render it, but we are going to take the sky dome, partition it off, and call it our hidden partition, of which we're going to hit H and hide the contents, both view and render visibility wise. And then again, I'm going to take the snowfall and the point cloud, snowfall emitter and point cloud, and just call this the snow cloud emitter partition. Alright, now this I want to hide because the snow's already rendered another pass. Finally, I'm going to build a new pass, another empty pass, so everything gets brought back in, and this is basically just the sky dome pass. Just going to isolate the sky dome on its own render pass so it can easily composite the snow back in. So again, if we go to the sky dome pass's background partition, everything is initially brought into it when we create a new pass. So I will take the ground, the birch, the snowfall, and the point cloud, partition them off, separate them from the background objects partition, call it hidden partition, and of course hide the view and render visibility. And then with regards to the sky dome, I'm just going to partition that off and call it the sky dome partition, and do nothing to it. So again, all I have is the sky dome that's being rendered. So with these three passes now, I'm going to set them up for a render. Maybe what I'm going to do here when I render off is I'm going to render maybe a 300 frame sequence, and I don't really want to have to render all the way from frame 0. Well, if I switch passes here, let's switch to the snow pass. I don't want to have to render from frame 0 to some frame where the snow is already fully formed. So again, I have to wait here for probably about 300 frames, there we go, before the snow is already in progress. What I can actually do though is take any frame in the timeline, and if I select the point cloud and I switch over to the simulate toolset, I can go in and set the initial state of those particles, basically setting the 253rd frame, in our case, as the first frame. So it kind of controls the pre-roll that we use to generally kind of get the particles started way before the first frame of our simulation. So now if I go back to frame 1 and I hit play, we're already starting from this amount of movement. In this case, I'm going to go in and kind of just make sure that all parts of the scene are being hit properly. I can go in and just scale this a little bit. And what I'll do is increase the amount of particles to finish this off. So my rate now, I'm going to go up to say 800. And if I hit play, again, I've changed the rate, so the initial state is going to have far fewer particles than are going to be available to me in a short time. So again, now I've got a much more dense snow effect. Again, I don't really want that many, so I'm going to cut it down to maybe 250. Wait for the effect to carry through to the newly born particles, so we should see a relative thinning here pretty quickly. There we go. They're starting to thin out a little bit. And I think I like that. That's a nice amount of particles. If I draw a render region, that's a nice amount to fill a scene, and we have them being cut off here. Okay, so as far as rendering goes now, I'm going to switch to the render toolbar, and I'm going to set these particles up for their final render, all 3 passes. Of course, I don't need to render the default pass, so I can actually delete that pass. And if I need to recreate a pass where I have everything visible, I can just go back in and create a new empty pass. So if I go into the renderer options, the first thing I want to do is set the aliasing levels. And aliasing of -1 and 1 will work in this case. Keeping the aliasing really low because the particles are going to render quickly and we're going to be blurring them anyways. We just want the variety of shapes to help the blur shape that we've created. So I'm going to take the sampling contrast just a little bit higher, so again we spend less time on rendering the particles. And actually I want to set these options, the high sampling contrast and the sort of mid-quality aliasing, I want to actually set that for the snowpass. So I'm going to find the snowpass's mental ray renderer, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to make a local copy here. So I'm actually making a copy of the values I just set in this snowpass. So these are local now, and we can tell they're local because the mental ray icon is not italicized, much like we see the hardware render italicized here. And if I just go back to my sky dome pass, so my sky pass, my ground and trees pass definitely need to be clear, crystal clear, have a high quality rendering to them. So I'm going to just click on this mental ray that they share, and this is the initial one that I edited. I don't want to make a local copy here because I can now set these to the min-max levels that would be production quality. So I'll use a min-max of 0 and 2, and I'll keep the sampling contrast rather low in this case. Now this is a lockdown camera, so I'm better off in a few ways in the sense that I can just render off a single still image of the background and of the sky dome unless the sky is going to change. So to do that, I'm going to, on a per pass basis, say go to the snow pass, and I'm going to go to the pass options. First of all, make sure my snow pass is the name of my rendered pictures. So if I show the resolved pass, we can see that it's going to be rendered as a pic file, which is fine to me. It's going to be rendered into my training project render pictures folder, and all of the passes will follow that same set of rules. Take the name of the pass and render as whatever format I choose. So that's good there. So with the snow pass, I'm also going to go into the scene options where I can choose the frame set to render, and I'm going to render 300 frames. Start frame of frame 1 and frame 300, and I'm going to render them at an NTSC 720 by 540 ratio, just to save on time. We're using mental ray as our renderer, so that's fine there. I'm just going to switch to the other two passes, the ground tree pass. If I go into its scene options, what I want to do here is to do a frame range, so I'll just do frames 1 to 1. I don't need a 300 frame sequence for this one. If I switch to the sky dome pass and I go into its scene options, so we've got 1 to 1 frame range. Let's go back into the Explorer here. Switch down to the ground tree pass. So we have that there. And finally, if I switch back to the snow pass, go to the scene options. So for this one here, it looks like it's actually taking the values from the global settings. So actually, every time I'm setting the start and end frame, it's just using that same start and end frame for each of my passes. So it's easy to fix that, and that can confuse a lot of people. So it's good that I actually came across this now. It's sort of a new way of organizing things in exercise 7. So on the snow pass, if I want to override those global settings, so again, my global scene options now are rendering a single frame at 720 by 540. If I want the snow pass to reflect different changes, I'll just go to the pass options where I'm editing the snow pass, and I'm actually going to set the pass frames instead to use my own frame range. So I'll do 1 to 300 for the snow pass here. And of course we're rendering from the pass camera. So that's the whole trick to it, to localize the effect. So if I go back into the ground tree pass, everything's going to have this start and end frame of 1 and 1, but when I actually jump into the snow pass, I go into its scene options, although it says 1 to 1, the pass options are telling me that I'm using Siri. Switch to my snow pass, there we go. And go into the pass options there. I'm using a frame range of 1 to 300 frames. can also look at this through the render manager as well. If you're actually to look at the snow pass here, we can see that with the snow pass we're using a frame range 1 to 300. With the Skydome pass, the Skydome pass is using the pass frames, so it's using the scene render options, and the ground tree pass is also using the scene render options. So it's just this option here that allows you to make the effects global or local. Okay, I'll save the scene and we can render this. So I'll take a little bit of time to render, so I'll render off every pass first and then come back in and finish off this discussion.